Welcome back to History Chronicles TV. Today, we will be exploring 10 of the darkest chapters in human history. Our channel is dedicated to shedding light on the most harrowing events of the past, events that have shaped our world and the way we think about humanity. From the horrifying Nanking Massacre to the chilling Holocaust, we delve into the depths of history to understand these unimaginable atrocities. By examining their causes, consequences, and the human stories within them, we hope to promote awareness, empathy, and the importance of preventing such horrors in the future. Join us on this journey through history as we remember, reflect, and strive for a better world. Let's get started. The Malay Massacre, which occurred on March 16, 1968 during the Vietnam War, is one of the most infamous incidents in modern military history. A unit of American soldiers, primarily from Charlie Company, descended upon the village of My Lai in Quang Ngai Province, South Vietnam. Over the course of several hours, these soldiers engaged in a brutal rampage, killing an estimated 347 to 504 unarmed civilians, including women, children, infants, and elderly people. The massacre involved not only shootings, but also acts of extreme violence, such as sexual assault, mutilation, and the destruction of homes and livestock. It was a horrifying and senseless act of violence against innocent civilians, and the news of the massacre sent shockwaves around the world. The Malay Massacre raised significant moral and ethical questions about the conduct of American forces in Vietnam and led to widespread anti-war protests and increased opposition to the war. It also resulted in investigations, trials, and convictions of some of the soldiers involved, although many felt that the legal proceedings did not fully bring justice to the victims. The Malay Massacre remains a dark chapter in American military history and serves as a stark reminder of the brutality and human cost of armed conflicts. The Srebrenica Massacre, which occurred in July 1995 during the Bosnian War, stands as one of the most tragic events in recent European history. Srebrenica, a town in eastern Bosnia and Herzegovina, had been declared a safe zone by the United Nations, intended to protect Bosnian Muslim civilians from the ongoing conflict. However, in a shocking turn of events, Bosnian Serb forces, commanded by General Ratko Mladic, overran the town and its environs. They systematically separated and executed more than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys, regardless of their age or civilian status. This massacre, marked by mass shootings, forced marches, and mass graves, was a gruesome example of ethnic cleansing and genocide. The international community was heavily criticized for failing to prevent or stop the massacre, despite the presence of UN peacekeeping forces. The Srebrenica Massacre not only resulted in an immeasurable loss of life, but also shattered trust in international efforts to bring peace and stability to the region. The aftermath of the massacre led to efforts to locate and identify the victims, with the establishment of the International Commission on Missing Persons, ICMP, playing a crucial role in identifying and reuniting families with their loved ones' remains. Additionally, it fueled calls for justice, leading to the establishment of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, to prosecute those responsible for war crimes and genocide in the Balkans. The Srebrenica Massacre serves as a stark reminder of the horrors of war, the consequences of inaction, and the importance of international efforts to prevent such atrocities from occurring again. The Guatemalan Civil War, a protracted and brutal conflict spanning from 1960 to 1996, stands as a grim chapter in Central American history. At its core, the war was driven by deep-seated issues of socioeconomic inequality, political repression, and historical grievances. The conflict was characterized by a complex web of actors, with the Guatemalan government, often backed by the military, facing off against various leftist guerrilla groups. Indigenous Mayan communities found themselves at the heart of this maelstrom. Already marginalized and economically disadvantaged, they bore the brunt of the violence. Government forces conducted scorched earth campaigns, massacres, and forced displacements, causing immense suffering and loss of life among the Mayan population. the indigenous communities caught in the crossfire endured unimaginable atrocities. Several guerrilla movements, such as ORPA and URNG, emerged to combat the oppressive regime and address deeply rooted social injustices. While their causes were just, they, too, resorted to violent tactics, contributing to the cycle of bloodshed. Conflict officially came to an end in 1996, with the signing of peace accords brokered by the United Nations. These agreements led to substantial political reforms, including the demilitarization of society and the incorporation of guerrilla groups into the political landscape. Despite these positive steps, the scars of the Guatemalan Civil War run deep. The legacy of trauma, mistrust, and unresolved human rights issues continues to reverberate through Guatemalan society, particularly among its indigenous communities. Reconciliation and justice remain elusive for many who suffered during those tumultuous decades. The Guatemalan Civil War serves as a stark reminder of the profound human cost of armed conflicts rooted in social and political disparities, echoing a broader global narrative of the devastating impact of such conflicts on vulnerable populations. The Holodomor, a tragic chapter in Ukrainian history, unfolded during the early 1930s. It was a man-made famine engineered by Joseph Stalin's Soviet regime with devastating consequences for the Ukrainian population. The word Holodomor itself translates to death by hunger in Ukrainian, a fitting description of the catastrophe that unfolded. Stalin's policies, particularly his forced collectivization of agriculture, led to the seizure of grain and foodstuffs from Ukrainian farmers. This was accompanied by brutal repression, as those who resisted collectivization were often subjected to persecution, execution, or imprisonment. The result was a severe disruption of Ukraine's agricultural system, causing widespread crop failure and food shortages. To make matters worse, the Soviet authorities implemented grain procurement quotas that were impossible for Ukrainian farmers to meet. They essentially confiscated whatever food was left, leaving Ukrainians with little to no sustenance. The famine that ensued was nothing short of catastrophic. Millions of Ukrainians, including men, women, and children, perished due to starvation. The extent of the tragedy was compounded by the fact that the Soviet government denied the existence of the famine and actively suppressed information about it. Any attempts to seek assistance or international aid were met with denials and obfuscation. The Holodomor is a harrowing reminder of the consequences of totalitarian rule and the devastating impact of political decisions on ordinary people. It remains a deeply sensitive and painful subject in Ukraine's history, and efforts to recognize it as a genocide continue to this day. The Holodomor serves as a somber testament to the resilience of the Ukrainian people in the face of immense suffering and injustice. The Bengal Famine of 1943 stands as one of the most devastating famines in modern history. It occurred in the Bengal region, which was under British colonial rule at the time, and now comprises parts of India and Bangladesh. The famine unfolded during World War II, and its tragic impact was exacerbated by a combination of factors, including British policies. The primary cause of the famine was the disruption of normal food production and distribution due to the war. Bengal was a significant rice-producing region, but with the war effort, there was a shift in agricultural priorities. Many farmers were forced to abandon rice cultivation in favor of cash crops like jute and wheat, which were in high demand for the war. Additionally, supply routes and transportation networks were strained by the war, making it difficult to move food from surplus regions to Bengal. The British government's policies exacerbated the situation. They imposed strict controls on food distribution, diverting grain to the military and for export, leaving insufficient supplies for the local population. There were also issues related to hoarding and black marketeering. The consequences were dire. Millions of people in Bengal faced severe food shortages, leading to widespread malnutrition and starvation. Estimates of the death toll vary, but it is generally believed that between 2 and 3 million people lost their lives during the famine. The Bengal Famine of 1943 remains a deeply contentious and painful chapter in the history of British colonial rule. Many have criticized the British government's handling of the situation, arguing that they failed to take adequate measures to alleviate the suffering of the local population. It also highlights the devastating human cost of war and the complex interplay of factors that can lead to famine in vulnerable regions. The Cambodian Genocide, which occurred from 1975 to 1979, is one of the most devastating genocides in history. It was carried out by the Khmer Rouge regime, led by Pol Pot, who aimed to create an extreme form of agrarian communism in Cambodia. The Khmer Rouge's radical policies led to the forced evacuation of urban areas, where millions of Cambodians were sent to labor in rural collectives. They were subjected to brutal and inhumane conditions, including long hours of forced agricultural labor with little food or medical care. This resulted in widespread malnutrition and disease, causing countless deaths. The regime also systematically executed perceived enemies, intellectuals, professionals, and anyone suspected of disloyalty to the regime. These mass killings occurred in killing fields where victims were often tortured and interrogated before being murdered. The Khmer Rouge's reign of terror resulted in the deaths of approximately 1.7 million people, which was nearly a quarter of Cambodia's population at the time. It left the country scarred with profound social, psychological, and economic consequences. The international response to the Cambodian genocide was slow, and it was only after the fall of the Khmer Rouge in 1979 that the extent of the horrors became widely known. The genocide serves as a stark reminder of the capacity for extreme brutality within totalitarian regimes, and highlights the importance of preventing such atrocities in the future through international cooperation and awareness. The Nanking Massacre, also known as the Rape of Nanking, occurred during the Second Sino-Japanese War, when Japanese forces captured the city of Nanking, now Nanjing, in China between December 1937 and January 1938. This period witnessed some of the most horrifying atrocities in modern history. As Japanese forces entered Nanking, they embarked on a campaign of extreme violence against the Chinese population. Mass killings, rapes, and widespread looting and destruction became rampant. The exact number of casualties during the Nanking Massacre is still a subject of debate among historians, but estimates suggest that tens of thousands, and possibly hundreds of thousands, of Chinese civilians and disarmed soldiers were killed. Rape was used as a weapon of war on a staggering scale. Chinese women and girls of all ages, including infants and the elderly, were brutally assaulted by Japanese soldiers. Many victims did not survive these assaults, and those who did often suffered severe physical and psychological trauma. The looting and destruction of the city were equally devastating. Japanese soldiers pillaged homes, businesses, and cultural institutions, resulting in the loss of priceless artifacts and historical treasures. Much of the city was left in ruins. The Nanking Massacre remains a deeply sensitive and contentious issue in Sino-Japanese relations and has caused significant pain and resentment among the Chinese people. Japan has officially acknowledged the events of the Nanking Massacre, but discussions and disputes regarding its extent and the responsibility of the Japanese government and military continue. The Nanking Massacre serves as a stark reminder of the horrors of war and the need to preserve historical memory to prevent such atrocities from happening again. It remains a crucial topic in discussions about human rights, war crimes, and reconciliation in the context of World War II history in Asia. The Rwandan Genocide of 1994 is a harrowing chapter in modern history. It was a brutal ethnic conflict that took place in the small East African nation of Rwanda and resulted in the mass killing of approximately 800,000 people. The majority of the victims were Tutsis, although moderate Hutus were also targeted. The genocide was triggered by long-standing ethnic tensions between the Tutsi minority and the Hutu majority, exacerbated by political and socio-economic factors. The assassination of Rwandan President Juvenal Habyarimana on April 6, 1994 marked the beginning of the genocide. Extremist Hutu militias, backed by elements of the Rwandan government and military, initiated a campaign of violence and terror. Over a span of just 100 days, from April to July 1994, Hutu extremists carried out systematic and widespread massacres. Victims were often killed with machetes, clubs, and other crude weapons. The killings were brutal, and victims faced unimaginable horrors. The international response to the Rwandan Genocide was largely characterized by inaction and a failure to intervene promptly to stop the bloodshed. This remains a source of regret and reflection for the international community. In July 1994, the genocide was halted by the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPFA Tutsi rebel group, led by Paul Kagame, who later became Rwanda's president. The ERPF's military victories put an end to the killing, and Kagame's government has since focused on rebuilding the nation and fostering reconciliation. The Rwandan genocide serves as a painful reminder of the consequences of unchecked hatred, discrimination, and violence. It highlights the need for early intervention in conflicts, the importance of international cooperation in preventing atrocities, and the ongoing challenges of post-genocide reconciliation and recovery. The Armenian Genocide is a tragic and deeply significant event in history. It refers to the systematic and deliberate extermination of the Armenian population, along with other Christian minority groups, such as Assyrians and Greeks, by the Ottoman Empire during and after World War I. The genocide began in 1915, when the Ottoman government, under the rule of the Young Turks, initiated a series of deportations, forced marches, mass killings, and death marches. Armenian intellectuals, community leaders, and professionals were arrested and executed en masse in what is now known as the Red Sunday on April 24, 1915. This marked the beginning of a campaign to eliminate the Armenian population. During these deportations and death marches, countless Armenians perished due to starvation, exposure, and brutal treatment. Mass killings were carried out through methods such as mass shootings, drownings, and the use of poison. Many Armenian women and children were subjected to horrific violence and forced conversions. The estimates of the death toll vary, but it is widely accepted that around 1.5 million Armenians lost their lives during this period. This tragedy not only resulted in a staggering loss of life, but also had a profound and lasting impact on the Armenian diaspora, as survivors and their descendants dispersed across the world. Despite extensive evidence and international recognition of the events as a genocide, the Turkish government continues to deny its occurrence and fiercely opposes the use of the term genocide to describe the events of 1915-1923. This has been a source of contention and diplomatic tension between Turkey and various countries. The Armenian Genocide is remembered not only as a dark chapter in history, but also as a symbol of the importance of recognizing and preventing genocide. Efforts to acknowledge and commemorate the Armenian Genocide continue to be a matter of international significance and remembrance for the Armenian community worldwide. The Holocaust, one of the most horrific events in human history, was a systematic genocide orchestrated by Nazi Germany during World War II. It primarily targeted the Jewish population, resulting in the deaths of approximately 6 million Jews. However, it also led to the persecution and murder of millions of other people, including Romani, Gypsy people, disabled individuals, political dissidents, and various minority groups. The Holocaust was carried out through a range of methods, including mass shootings, forced labor camps, and extermination camps equipped with gas chambers and crematoria. Jewish individuals were subjected to discrimination, segregation, and brutal violence. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 stripped Jews of their citizenship and legal rights, and Kristallnacht in 1938 marked a violent escalation of anti-Semitic persecution. As Nazi forces expanded across Europe, they implemented a policy known as the Final Solution, which aimed to systematically exterminate the Jewish population. This involved mass deportations to concentration camps, where inmates endured extreme hardships, including forced labor, starvation, medical experiments, and inhumane living conditions. Extermination camps, such as Auschwitz, Sobibor, and Treblinka, were specifically designed for mass murder. Victims were herded into gas chambers, where they were killed with toxic chemicals, primarily Zyklon B. Their bodies were then disposed of in crematoria. Apart from Jews, other minority groups suffered under the Nazi regime. Romani people were persecuted and subjected to mass killings. Disabled individuals were targeted through the T4 program, which aimed to euthanize those deemed unfit by the Nazi regime. Political dissidents, homosexuals, and Jehovah's Witnesses also faced persecution. The Holocaust serves as a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the consequences of unchecked hatred and prejudice. It led to the establishment of principles of human rights and international law, as well as efforts to ensure never again through the prosecution of war criminals during the Nuremberg trials. The memory of the Holocaust is preserved to honor its victims and to prevent such atrocities from happening in the future.